Hi guys, welcome back in another exciting video where we're going to be creating this awesome project. So this awesome project that I created not to be able to create a complete job listing application, but it's just an interface to be able to create a filtering system. So that's the basic idea why I created this. So I'm going to show you everything here step by step. So alongside with design, I'm not, so that's the easiest part, but the hardest part is to be able to create this filtering system. So I'm going to show you how it is working. So here we're having this drop down menu. So we're having these tags here dependent, and all of those tags are dependent upon all of those tags that we're having here. So we're gonna create that kind of thing to be able to pull out all these tags and to be able to unify them and put them here in the drop down. So let's say, for example, I want a project manager. So we're having here two people. So those are just, I duplicated them just for testing purposes. So let's say, for example, I want the front end person. So we're having this person. Let's say, for example, I want a UI designer. So we're having three people here. And let's say, for example, I want just the people who knows the Adobe, for example. So we're going to filter by Adobe, and we're having these two people here. And also here in this filtering, we can sort by. And let's say, for example, let's hit the recent post. So they are sorted by the um, recent post. And the filtering thing is working as well. So I'm going to clear that out, and everything goes back. And let's say, for example, if we don't find the person. So we're having this screen here, and if I click on the clear all filter, everything goes back again. So we're going to be creating this awesome project, and there are going to a lot of things, and you're going to learn a lot of things in this project. So if you want to learn how to create this, stick with me till the end of this video. Welcome back. So in our project, we're going to do two modifications. We're going to use Typescript, but also we're going to use Tailwind CSS. So I'm going to show you first how to be able to install Tailwind CSS. So head over their website. So that's the link. And also I'm using Next.js bef- because of this. They recommend to use Next.js parcel white. So I'm pretty familiar with Next.js, so I'm going to use it. And don't worry, we're not going to use the server side. So you are going to use it normally as you would use a simple React. So by clicking on the next.js here, so just follow all of those steps to be able to install Tailwind CSS. And the reason why I decided to use Tailwind CSS because it is a time saver and you can be able to style all components just inside your JS or GSX or TSX file. So you don't have to jungle between the files, the CSS file and the actual component, which is time consuming and overwhelming. And don't worry, if you are familiar with CSS, it's not going to be a big of a problem. But for the people who are just starting out and they don't know any CSS at all, it is recommended first to learn CSS and then use Tailwind CSS. And also make sure to install this extension here, Tailwind CSS or Intelligent Tailwind CSS to be able to have suggestions when you are creating or adding the CSS utilities inside the class name. Next, I created this job card.csx, which is going to be the card that we're going to use for our listing. And I'm going to show you in our DOM. So this is just temporarily, and to be able to center it inside the global.css, I'm using those properties temporary as well. We are going to delete them as we move on with our project. And here for the styling, I want to show you the advantage of using Tailwind CSS. Like for example, the styling only took this amount of text. So those are our utility classes. And the border is for the border. And we're setting the border as gray. And this is the depth. And also we're using the P for padding, the rounded for rounded radius, the shadow, and the text size. So as you can see here, it's pretty straightforward and it takes just some lines of code to style your whole component, and that is the advantage of using the Tailwind CSS rather than doing it the old way, which it takes a lot of time and it's pretty overwhelming, especially when your project gets bigger and you need to go back and forth between the files. So I highly recommend to learn Tailwind CSS, especially if you are familiar with CSS. So this is the structure of the card or the job card that we're going to use. And I'm going to go through this very quickly to share with you the structure, how I was able to really create this. So here I created it in a form of functional components so the code can be readable. So for this part, I called it the job rounded image. So there we're going to use the image. It's just a placeholder. And also we're going to use the job info component where we're going to store the information here. And inside of it, we're having three items here and here and here they are. And also finally, we're having the job tags. And those are just class utilities that we used to be able to design that. So I'm not going to go into them. So I highly recommend. So if you are familiar with CSS, it's going to be a piece of cake to use those things. They are just shortcuts that that we are going to learn with time. And for the tags, they're not going to be like this. We are going to use map function once we start working with the data. Next, I made this look this way. And what I did just temporarily, I added the job card that we just created. So I put this like this. Uh, it's not going to be like this. We are going to use the map function. So when we're going to start working with data, and also what I did here, I used this, or I created this filter by section functional component to create this filter button. So those are the utility classes that I used. And also what I'm doing here, I'm creating this div for the text, but also I'm using the font awesome icon for this icon. And also I did some changes here. So the first thing that I did, I added this div as the root element. Then for this part underneath this box, this is its div, and I used the absolute property, and also this needs to be relative to be within the root container. And also here, I made this the z index as 10 because once this is turned on, it's above this box, so we need to make it beneath it. So we use the z index for this box to be above this orange box. And also for to be able to appear this, I made this filter by section that this function, I made it here. And then I created another div where those job cards are in, and I used the display flex and the colon direction. As you can see, flex colon, and I used this gap so you can have a little bit of gap between the button and all those items. Then I created this menu for filter by, but also I created this button to be able to sort those items, and we're going to use the same menu for the sort by. So let's go over our Visual Studio Code and I'm going to show you how I did it. So here the first thing that I did, I created this body and I put it inside the drop-down menu since we are going to work with data. And in order to be able to see how it is looking, I created this filter options area. So right now at this moment, those are just for testing. And then we are calling for each item this function that incorporates the body of our drop down. And we are using the checkbox component from the MUI library. And then we are just rendering the text. And also we are adding the prop here, and that's just the type. Uh, Temporarily it is a string because we are using here the the item is a string. And this is we are referring to the string or the array of strings. So that's why we're doing this since we're using TypeScript. Next, I made some visual stylings. Next, I made some visual changes in our little job listing page by adding the head or the header, but also I changed the colors of the buttons, but also I changed the background and I made it gradient like this. So I'm going to show you what I did. So the first thing, as you noticed, so we have a little code here, and because we used all those functions and exported them inside their own files. So I created them inside the components, and for each function, I called it for its name to be able to know it for the filter button. So this is so this is its code, and the same thing for the sort by button and the drop down sort. So we're using, instead of trying to use the drop down for a single item, I created it in a way so it can be able to store all the elements and to be able to render each element. So I did the same thing for the drop down filter. So next, what we are going to do, we are going to create our data so we can be able to fill up those items dynamically based on the data. And we are going to create kind of or simulate the fetching of the data. We're not gonna work on the back end. We're just working on the front end, and that's gonna be with the context API. So you can be able to use all the information in one place across all the components. And also, we're gonna make this work, meaning that those need to be hidden by default. So when we click on this button or this button, this drop down, it's gonna open up. And finally, we're gonna work on the sorting and the filtering logics or logic because those are the most important elements in our project. Next, I created the context API that we're going to use to share information across all child components. I'm going to do my best to be able to explain that. So the first thing that we did here, I created this type single data, which is the type that we're going to use for a single item inside the data array. So this is just for demonstration because we're going to create other properties for our case, which is the job listing. And here we are creating this data context API, which is the type of the whole object structure that we're going to use for our context API. So here we are creating a context using the create context function. And here we are assigning it to this type or null by using this union. And here by default, we are setting the data as an array. And here in the function global provider, we are creating this prop and we are assigning it the React node because we are going to add nodes and tags inside this global context app provider, which we are going to wrap around all the components inside the home page, which is the root element of our project. So let's go back to the context API. And here we're just creating our variables. So here we are using this assertion, meaning that this it's going to be a single data type of array. And in the use effect, I'm just using this as a test, and I'm setting the data, this new data to this data variable, and we are returning this to be able to use our context and the value. So make sure to add wherever you're adding here, you make sure to add it here so other components can use it. And here we are using this custom hook to be able to consume this context. And of course, we are returning those two objects. And I'm going to show you how we can be able to consume this. So the first thing that you need to do, all you need to do is to use this line. You are destructing the this from the use global context a provider, which is our custom hook, and then you can use this data wherever you want to use. And this is so far our what we're having here. So we're having our array. So the only thing that we need to do here, you need we need to in our context API, we need to create our first we need to modify this depending on the things that we are going to use inside our little project, and then we are going to use other variables depending on our needs throughout our project. Next, I created this logic. When I click on the sort by button, I have this drop down menu, and the same for the filter by button. And as you notice, only one drop down opens up. So I'm going to show you what I did to be able to create this functionality. And one thing probably that I need to create is when I click outside of this, it's gonna close this up. We're gonna work on this. So let's go back to our context API. I'm gonna show you how I did this. And that's the first use of our context API. So the first thing that I did, I created those state variables. So they are initially as false. And since we're using the data context type inside our global context, we need to add them here. So we're adding this open filter button and we're setting it as Boolean type. And with the set open filter button, it refers to this function to be able to change our state. And I did the same thing for the sort button and set open sort button. And in our global context, since those are mandatory, we need to use them. So those are the default. And for the open sort button, it's going to be as default false. And this is a function, an empty function, since this is also a function. And I'm going to show you how I was able to open up and close the drop down. So the first thing, we're going to go to the sort by button here. So we are calling this. So we are consuming our global context provider, our custom hook. And also I'm creating the onClick event listener. So when we click on this, this gets fired up, and we are changing our state to its opposite. And also here, as you can see, we are also using the set open filter button to false, so that when I click on this if it is opened, it's gonna closes up like this. And also the same, and in our drop down sort here, we need to use the open sort button to be able, so that's the thing that we are going to rely on to whether we're going to open or close the actual drop down. So what I did here, I used the open source button in the tyranny operator. So if it is true, we're going to set those utility classes, and if it is false, we are going to set this, meaning that we are going to make it invisible and the opacity is going to be 0. And one minor issue that I found, like previously when I open this up and I click on one of these, it closes. And the reason why is because this drop down was part of the main container of this button. So in order to fix that, what I did, I created another div that wraps around those two elements, this text and the icon, and to be able to dissociate from the root container or the root div. And then I added the on-click event listener here. So when I click on this, as you can see right now, it is not closing because the drop down is not part of the root element where the button was existing. So right now the open or the set open sort button variable is totally dissociated from the root container and it is only existing in this button. And we're going to do the same for the filter, and I did the same for the filter by button. Another issue that I found, and of course that I fixed, is here when I wanted to load or to access the data, what we were doing, we are creating our main structure here inside the home function. And we were wrapping the whole structure with the global provider. So when I wanted to consume our context here in our home function, I couldn't access the data because it was outside the global provider. So what I did to fix this, I created another component. I called it just app. And what I did, I paste the whole code inside here and I called the app component and I put the global provider tag around the app so you can be able to access the data or all the values here inside our context API. So right now it is working. So as you can see here, I'm just importing or accessing to the data by consuming our context provider. But also, as you noticed, I'm using or I created a new variable. I called it is loading, so you can be able to simulate the loading state. And one thing also that I added here in order to simulate the fetching of data, I used the set timeout. So we're not going to go into anything here related to the backend. We're just focusing on the front end, and to be able to simulate that, I'm using the set timeout. And that is something that is widely used in the web development. So what I'm doing here, I'm creating the is loading variable state and I set it to true by default and make sure to add it here. And also as a type, it is Boolean. So first it's going to be true and after 2 seconds, it's going to be false. And then we can access to it here to be able to just show this message just to know that everything is working fine. And after this loading is false, then we can show the data. And that's what we're having here. So I'm gonna refresh the page to show you how it is working. So we are gonna get the message loading data here. And then after 2 seconds, we get our data. So this is just temporarily, it doesn't fit at all with all the elements that we're having here. So that's what we are going to work on. Next, I added or I changed the data. And as you can see right now, the data looks pretty much real. So right now we have real names, real occupations, and also we're having real tags here. So I'm going to show you very quickly what I did to be able to do this. And the first thing that I did, I created this jobs data file where I put our array of objects and it's going to be the type of single data and make sure to import the type. So because right now it is outside of our context API, I had to create another file and I called it type where I'm putting the type. So because I added some properties here, to be able to make our job card more real. So I added the occupation is new property, post data is full-time and skills. It's going to be an array of strings. And also what I did here, I imported our jobs data string and I used it here inside the state data to be able to change and update our data variable state. So I'm gonna go over the app function, and here we are consuming our data, and what we're doing here, and that's the main change here, if it is, and that's why I created this loading state. So if it is true, it's going to show our text loading. Otherwise, when it is going to turn to false, we are going to show the information by using the map function. So I'm going to go back to the browser to show you how it is working. So right now we're having the loading text, and after 2 seconds, we're going to have our data. So that's it simulating the real fetching. So now once we are in this place, we're gonna use the job card component, and we are creating the single data where we're gonna pass in, or the single data prompt, we're gonna pass in the single data. So each element is gonna be passed inside our job card. So let's go to the job card here. So here we are creating, of course, our prompt here to be able to use the single data, and it's going to be the type of single data, and also we are importing the single data type from types. And here what we're doing, we are creating in the job info, which is this part, we are creating this prompt, and we are passing in it the single data to be able to consume the data in our job info component. So here we're using the name, and also we are using the is new, and it's gonna be here. It's gonna be if the is new is true, we're gonna show the new tag. Otherwise, it's not gonna be shown. That's why we're having some of the cards here have the new tag, and some of them don't have the new tag isn't there because the is new property is false. And we're having the occupation here, and also we're using the turn operator here if it is full-time. So meaning if it is true, we're going to show the full-time text, otherwise it's going to be shown part-time. And here in the job tags, we're just using the skills property. We're not going to use the single data. So that's why we're adding here just single data dot skills, and we are creating the skills props, and here we are consuming it here. And since the skills is an array, we're going to use the map function. And as you saw, we're creating the tags, and we were hard coding them. So right now we're not going to do so because we are using the map function, and we are passing this div, and we are using for each skills, and that's the name that's going to be shown. So that's our final result. So right now it is looking very good and very professional. And the next thing that we're going to work on the sort by function. And also we're going to work on the filter by. In our filter button, when I click on this, we're having this drop down now. We're having a completed drop down with the occupation and the skills that we want to filter by. And also one thing that I added is these arrows. So when I click on the button and the drop down opens up, this goes up. And when I click on the actual button, the arrow goes back to its down position. So let's go back to our code, and I'm going to explain this, how I was able to create it, and I'm going to do it as much as I can. So the first thing that I did here, I created this global unique properties variable state, and we're going to go down here, and this is the function to be able to get unique items and properties or elements from the uh, occupation and also the scale. So the occupation is just a simple string, and the scales it's an array. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky because we're having an array and we need to get unique items from this array. So let's go back to our function, and I'm gonna start by this variable. So it's an object, and it holds a key and the value. So the key it's going to be a string, and the value it's going to be any array, meaning that because we're having true or false, meaning we're having Boolean, and we're having string, and we're having an array, so we need to put this as any, otherwise we're going to have some problems with TypeScript. And then since we're using the data prop, because here we're using the prop to accept the data, so we're going to use the data prop, and then we're going to use the for each to access to each item. And in each item, we're going to access to the key and value of each item. And since we're going to work only with the skills and occupation, that's why we did this if statement. And what we're doing here, we are storing or we're creating our property skills or occupation in our unique properties. And we're doing this to be able to avoid any duplicates, since we're going to go through each element and we're going to add occupation and skills for each element. So that's why we did this, to avoid having this duplicate, so we can have one property which is occupation and skills in our unique properties. And then in this portion, what we're going to do, we're going to add the items in the skills area of each element. We're going to add them in the skills property inside the unique properties. And so what we're doing here, because we are going to get all the values of the properties, and what we want the array, which is an object. So that's why we did this line. And so we're going to access to the value, meaning we're going to access to the array of each element, and we're going to use the for each function to be able to access to each item inside the skills array. And that's what we are doing. And we are storing in the skill property the values inside the array, and we're checking this, or we're doing this to avoid having any duplicates. So all those items here need to be unique. So that's why we're having here in our skills property. So we're having those elements and they're not duplicate. So let's go back to our function. And the last thing that we're going to do, we're going to add the elements inside the property occupation, since it's not an array. So it's going to be very simple. So we are going to add the values of each element inside the occupation property from the jobs data. It's going to be added to our unique properties object. And once we're having this, we are going to update our variable state into the global unique properties. And also one thing that we need to add to be able to consume this, we need to add it here inside the data context type. And also we need to add it here. And finally, we need to add it here inside our value object. And inside our drop down, so we're going to access to the drop down filter. So here, what we're doing here, we are using it here to be able to use it and show it inside our drop down. And also, this is the new code that I added to be able to show it inside our drop down. And since it is an object, so we're going to use the object. And also we're going to use the entries function to be able to access to the key and the value. So here instead of calling it key, I called it just property. And inside here, first, that's going to be the property, meaning the occupation. And inside the occupation, we're going to map through all the elements in it, and we are going to render each element here. So we're having the checkbox and the name here, the software engineer. And it's going to start again, and it's going to show the data scientist until we finish all the items inside the occupation. Then we're going to go to the skills. We're going to do the same thing. So this code, it's going to show this into our drop down, and those are just the utility classes that I added to be able to style it, to be able to show this as orange, and also I made the text a little bit bigger, and the same for the scales here. And also I used some inner styling of the checkbox element or component from the MUI library to be able to have this as an orange because by default it is blue. And in our filter by button, I added one thing or two things that I added. So the first thing that I added is this icon. So when it is open, as you can see, the arrow is up, and when it is closed, this icon goes down. So in order to do so, I added this simple line here. So I used the open filter button as a variable state to rely on to be able to whether show this icon. And this is this is the up arrow icon, and this is the down one. So if it is opened, the icon is going to go up, and if it is not opened, it's going to go false. And one last thing, and I'm gonna do my best to explain this. And because here, where when I added those texts, this width, or because this drop down was aligned horizontally with this button, so the text was hidden behind the scroll bar. So that's something that I don't want. So in order to position it to this place, so I had to create another div, and inside this div, I added those two elements. So this, it's going to be relative, and this is going to be absolute. So this absolute div, which is this dropdown, is going to be connected to this element. So that's why I left those borders like this to be able to explain this. So right now, when I'm going to use the left position, so it's going to be dependent on this div. It's not going to be dependent on the other div, which was the whole part here, because when I did use the left position, it went to this place. So that's why I added this. So make sure to do this to be able to have that kind of result. And the first step that we need to do before creating our filtering function, we need to create kind of a array or a container where we're going to be storing our attributes that we clicked on. Like for example here, we're having this empty array. So when I click on data scientist, we're having it here. And when I click, for example, on front end developer, it is added here in this array. And when I click again on data scientist, it goes away. And the same for the front end. So I'm going to show you how I did it step by step. So I'm going to go to the context API. So this is where I created this array. It is unique attributes clicked. That's how I name it. So it is very vital to add it here in the context API, which is the top level of our structure or the hierarchy of our projects, because that's where we're gonna get the information from, and that's where we are going to use the unique attributes to be able to filter and to update our data variable state. Anyways, so I'm going to show you next. So before I show you how I did it for the function, make sure to add those variables here in the data context type like this, but also add them here and also add them in the values or the value object to be able to consume those two variables. So let's go back to the drop-down filter. And here I'm going to show you the function here. So we need to put them here to be able to consume those variables. And then we're going to go to the checkbox here where we click on the item. So we're clicking on the on-click event listener, and we're creating this function clicked check, and we are getting the single value, the attribute that we clicked on. So let's go up to the clicked checkbox function. So first you need to assign the type, which is string, And here inside the set unique attributes clicked, we are going to add our value or we are going to delete it based on the index of clicked value. So because of the asynchronous nature of React and to avoid having any problems, we are going to do this update inside the set unique attributes clicked. So that's something it is well known, and that's one of the best practices that you need to use or to do in React. So here, if the index of clicked value is returning -1, meaning that it is not existing yet on the variable or on the array, we're going to add it by using the push method. Otherwise, if it is returning an index, we're gonna delete it by using the splice function, and then we are going to return the prev state. So that's basically how we can be able to update and create this kind of temporary array, because that's the thing that we're gonna use mainly to be able to filter the items that we're having here. Before we move on creating our filtering function, I found a lot of problem and I fixed it, and I want to show you how to be able to do this. Like right now, for example, everything is working fine. So all those attributes that I clicked on, they are saved, and when I uncheck them, they are deleted. And we are getting the logout from the context API, so we're not getting it inside the function. And that's the problem that I found. So when I wanted to use it outside of this function, like in the context API. So that's why we did this, to be able to use it here. And we're going to create the function of filtering. And based on the unique attributes, we're going to filter our items. And what I did to fix the problem here, so inside of doing all of this inside the set unique attributes clicked, and I was wrong about this, sorry. What I did here, I created a new array, and that's the copy of the unique attributes collect. And so we are going to use the temp array to be able to get the index and then update whether we found the index or not. And we are going to update the unique attributes clicked based on the temp array. And this for React, it's gonna help React detect a change that has happened, because the references of the old and new state that are completely different. So when we are going to use the dependency array or the unique attributes collect as a dependency array, React is going to detect a change, and then we are going to get the log out of the unique attributes collect, and that's what we're having here. So when we click again on those items, we're getting those two items that we checked from the context API. So right now everything is working fine. So the only thing that we need to create from that is the filtering function. So now I created the filter by function, so it is fully working. So I'm going to show you, like for example, when I'm opening up the drop down and I select the software, so we're having this person, John Doe, because it has the software engineer occupation. And let's say, for example, in the skills, so because here we're having this person has only 3 skills, and let's say we select another skill, data analysts, so we're not having nothing. And we should here create a little screen telling the user that um, the item selected wasn't found. So we're going to work on that. So when I unselect this, we're back to our person here. And when I unselect everything, we're having all the items here in our list. And I'm gonna try another thing, like for example, the UX designer. So we're having this, and it has 3 skills here. So let's say we're going to select the Adobe. So we're still having the same item. And let's say we select CSS. Now we're not having anything. Let's go back to our code and I'm going to explain how I was able to create this. So it is a very simple function here, but building it might seem a little bit tricky, but in terms of length of this function, it's very short. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to start with the filter function. And I don't want to start from the way up. I want to start from the bottom to be able to explain this. So that's how I was able to understand this code. So here, because we're having two properties that we're going to work on, we're going to work on the skills and the occupation. So for the job skills, because it is an array, we are going to use the include to see if the attribute selected from the unique attributes clicked is returning something. So if it is returning something or the occupation that we selected is equal to the attribute that we're having in the array, if those both are true, we are going to return true because we need to only return true. That's why we use the every function. So if it is an item that we're having it false, it's not going to be added because of the every function. And then it's going to go through the filter function and it's going to be added in the filtered jobs. So here what we're doing, we are just updating our filtered data variable. And that's also one thing that I added here. We're not using the data to be able to render the items because right now it's going to be changed depending on the filtering options. I created another array or another state, variable state. I called it filtered data so that the data stays static, it doesn't change because we are going to rely on it when all the items are unchecked. And also make sure in the app component here, make sure to add it the filtered data. But before to be able to consume this, you need to do the same thing that we all did for other variables inside our context API. Make sure to add it here and also here in the global context and in the value object to be able to get this variable state in the app component. So once we have the filtered data, as I said, let's go back to the context API. So once we have it here, in our function. So once we have the filtered jobs, we are going to change the variable filtered data so that it can be re-rendered in our web page. And also one thing that I added, because when we uncheck all of those items, we need to repopulate the filtered data. So that's why I used this else, if else if statement. So if the area, the unique attributes collect is completely empty, we're going to repopulate the filtered data with the actual data. So right now, so when all the items are unchecked, so we have in all the items back, and because of this if statement. Next in our drop-down filter, as you can see when I'm clicking on these filters, we're getting right now this clear filter button. So when I click on it, so everything goes back to its initial position and all of those checkboxes are unchecked. So let's go back to our code and I'm going to show you how I was able to do this. So we are in our drop-down filter component, of course, and I'm going to show you very quickly how I was able to create this div or this button. Sorry. So the that's the actual button, and I included the icon. So I'm using the Font Awesome icon library to get or to create this closing button, and those are utility classes to be able to style the button. And also add in this function. When I click on it, this function gets triggered. And what we're actually doing, we are clearing the unique attributes clicked array. But the problem that I found when I did this, the checkboxes were still checked. So in order to fix that, so we're gonna go to the checkbox item here, and to be able to check that, because I didn't add any change in state of the checkbox. That's why we're having this problem. So the first thing that I did, I added this checked element here, and it's going to be linked whether the single value that we clicked on is actually in the unique attributes clicked, because this check gets only true or false, and based on this it will know that the checkbox is actually true and false. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, we're going to change or to actually update the state by using the onChange, and we're gonna trigger this function, and we're gonna pass in the single value element here. So let's go up to this function, and I'm gonna explain very briefly what's happening here. So we are using the turning operator, and as we saw for updating the state in React, we need first for immutability, we need first to work with the copy of the array, then update our variable state, and that's what we are doing, but we are doing it with the turning operator. Meaning, so what we are saying here, if the actual single value is is included in the update in the unique attributes clicked by using the filter data, um, what we're doing is we are filtering all the data that are not clicked on. So we are adding them in the update checked attributes, and we are adding them here in the set unique attributes clicked, so you can be able to change the actual unique attributes clicked state. And by doing so, when I'm going, for example, when I'm going to clear that, not only we are going to clear the actual unique states or unique attributes clicked, but also we are going to uncheck all of those items at the same time. So I hope that you understood how it is working. So it might be a little bit tricky, complicated, but to be honest, it took me a lot of while to be able to create that. Next, I created many things, so I'm gonna go over them each one. So the first thing that I did here that I added is this functionality. When I click outside the drop down, it closes automatically. But also another thing that I added, like when we don't find the thing or the things that we are checking for, we're having this little screen showing, and also we're having this button to clear everything out. And another thing that I created is how long the post was posted. So we're gonna go over all of that step by step. I'm gonna explain each functionality and how it is working. So let's start by showing you how we can be able to create this functionality when I click outside of the drop down to close it. So I'm gonna go straight to the drop down filter component, and this is where I added this. So the first thing that we need to do in order to access to the element of the div that is associated to actual drop down, we're going to use the use effect hook like we did here, and it's going to be of type HTML input element, and this variable is going to be added inside the ref to be able to access to it. And then we are going to create the whole thing here. So actually what we're doing, we are creating or adding the event click listener to the whole document, and we are making we are clean that up when the use effect is when we are exiting our use effect hook or our use effect function, sorry. And basically what we are doing here, what we are saying that if we click on an element that is outside by using outside of the actual drop down by using the contains function, if it is true, we are going to set the open filter button to false to close the actual drop down filter. And also in the button that we are clicking, because we set initially the whole document, it's going to be clickable. First, when we use the use effect hook, we need to set for the button, we need to do this to stop the propagation, meaning that this click event listener is not going to actually be in the actual button to be able to make it functionable when that happens. So it is very, very important to use this line if you want or if you want to make this actual button still working. Otherwise, when we click on this, it's not going to work. And the next thing that I'm going to show you is this little screen when the items that we want to filter by aren't found. So I created this, and also we're having this button. So it's going to be the same. It's going to act the same as this button here. So I'm going to show you briefly how I was able to create it. And that is pretty simple. So nothing complex here. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. So I'm adding here the icon. I'm adding the title and also the message here. And also I'm adding this function to be able to use the clear function. And here I'm using the unique attributes click to be able to clear all the unique attributes that we collect on so we can be able to clear out all the attributes or the checks that we did. And in order to be able to use this empty screen, I'm going to go to the up component and so what I did here, I added another layer here to be able to filter to know whether we are going to show the empty screen. So we're going to base or going to rely on the length of the filtered data. So if it is superior than 0, we are going to show our our data. Otherwise, we are going to show our empty screen. So it is pretty straightforward. And finally, I'm going to show you the loading screen here. So what I'm adding here is the circular progress, this spinner that we're having when we are loading up initially our web page, and I'm using it from the MUI. So it's a great library, by the way, if we want to really create some awesome UIs, and it's gonna be a time saver. So that's our actual loading screen, and I'm going to show you how I was able to do it or to use it. So actually, what we were doing, we were just showing the text. So instead of showing the text, we are gonna just replace it by the loading screen component. So that's how I was able to actually do all of those things. And right now our page or our job listing looks pretty professional right now, and we're having a lot of features that actually are used in the real world. So the next thing that I'm going to work on is I'm going to work on the sort by. And one last thing that I forgot to explain is I was able to create this function to be able to calculate how many days ago this post was posted. And I'm going to show you how I was able to do it. So actually what I'm going to the job card component. And the first thing that I did here, I created this function. So this function, I called this function post days difference. So in the post days difference, our prompt is single data post date because what we want to do, we want to use this function and we want to return a text that we are going to use here inside this div. So we're accepting the single data.post date. So actually we are accepting this property. So I'm going to go back to the job card here. Let's continue our function, explain our function. So what we're doing here, we are taking our single data post date and we are adding it in this date object because we want to convert it to date to be able to do the comparison between the actual or the current date. So this will return the current date. And those are going to be returned into with the or in milliseconds. And we are getting the start of the day because we want to do the comparison here. And also we are making the difference in millisecond, and we are making the difference between the new date and the old date. And to be able to know whether this post was actually posted today or not, we are doing this check here. So if it is true, we are going to return today. Otherwise, we're going to do the difference here, meaning we're going to convert this difference in millisecond to days, and we are going to actually return this this variable, and after it, it's going to be days ago. And finally, I created the sorting function beside changing the actual header of the project, and I added this icon. So right now it is looking much cleaner and professional. And here in our sorting button, if I click on the oldest post, as you can see, they are sorted from the oldest post to the recent one. And if I click on recent post, they are sorted by recent post. And also it's going to work with the filter. So for example, if I filter by this attribute and I click on sorting by by oldest posts, so they are sorted by oldest posts only for these three items that we filtered. And if I click here on click filters, so they're back, so we're having the items back to the browser. So let's go to the code to be able to explain what I did to make this function functionable. So I'm going to start with this sorting by date function. So this is where we are doing our sorting. So we are using the sort function here. And basically, the sorting date or sorting by date is accepting two elements, two arguments, recent or post. So if it is recent, so we're going to return this, otherwise we are going to return this, and then we are going to change our sorted data variable so we can have it re-rendered in our browser. And here in the handle click sort button, so when we are clicking whether on recent or old posts, this is what's going to happen. So we're going to change the option here based on what we clicked. So if we click on the recent post, we are going to get the old, we are going to get the recent, and I'm using the enum here. So you don't have to use it just because I'm new to TypeScript. I want to, try something new, and I decided to try the enum to be familiar with. So that's why I did it, but you can use directly here old or recent. So here we are adding the option here or the sort order inside the sorting by date function to be able to sort our items, but also we are closing our drop-down filter and we are doing this, and this we are going to use the selected option to be able to change the background of the selected item. So if the selected option that we clicked is equal to the option inside the sorting options.map, we are going to change the background, otherwise it's going to be by default.